also. One of my takeaways was that I believe all the actors and producers of the film were local talent. And I think that's remarkable, what a community can do to bring something to fruition. The cast and crew, if you want to stand up so we can give you, take a bow. The cast and crew will be in the back after the program if you have creative questions. I'm going to bring up our panel now, our expert panel. So we're fortunate to have on our panel Kirk Anderson. He's the inspiration for the movie. He did graduate from USC Law School, became addicted to drugs, developed a mental illness, and became homeless. Hello, Kirk. Dr. Jeremy Martinez, addiction psychiatrist and associate medical director for LA County, co-occurring disorders. Welcome, Dr. Martinez. Rita Crabtree Camp, MB Safe Director and Homeless Connect Outreach Chair. Welcome, Rita. Finally, we have Mark Burton, former city attorney for the City of Los Angeles, LA City Attorney Office, former Manhattan Beach Council member and the mayor. Welcome, Mark. So maybe starting with Kirk and going to the left. Introduce yourself in 1 to 2 minutes and tell the audience why homelessness is so important for you.
My name is Kirk, and I'm still addicted to drugs, and what makes me an addict is that I just couldn't control my use. You know, I couldn't stop, and I would spend all the money I could get my hands on. And I had a job, and they paid me on a Friday, and I was up all weekend. I called in sick on Monday, and they said, "You're fired." And I was so tired of looking for jobs, apartments, and cars that I just moved a sleeping bag underneath a bridge. And I spent the next 10 years there in my disease. I'm fortunate that my family, when I called out for help, gave me help. And through the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've gotten clean and have found a life, and it's beyond my dreams.
I'm Jeremy Martinez. I'm the Associate Medical Director for Co-occurring Disorders at Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. So part of our challenge in the Department of Mental Health is starting to address the fact that not only do our patients have mental disorders, but there are also substance issues that are causing problems for the people in our county. I've been interested in homelessness since I was a child, going to visit my dad in downtown Los Angeles, seeing people on Skid Row and just wondering, you know, what their life was like and who they were and what was going on. As I went to medical school, I didn't think I would become a psychiatrist. I thought I would become a real doctor. But once I started to do my psychiatry rotations and talk to psychiatric patients, it really, you know, was a real connection for me in terms of my interests of all of the things that really kind of coalesce problems of homelessness, addiction, and mental disorders. As time has gone on, I've learned a lot from both people who are in the healthcare industry as well as folks like her with lived experience who can really show what recovery looks like. steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and made huge changes in their lives, and that's wonderful. And thank you for having the courage to share that, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who can identify with what you're talking about, that inability to control the substance, and that's really one of the hallmarks of what causes substance problems. The topic of cannabis is especially important right now because we just got the data from the 2018 National Survey, and we have about a third of Americans have used cannabis at some point in their life, and we have I think about 5% of Americans, a very large number, that are continuously using cannabis. And what we're starting to see on the clinical side in the hospital is we're starting to see people come into the hospital because of using marijuana, developing psychosis and delusions like what you saw in this film. We've also seen people come in to our addiction treatment centers just for marijuana addiction. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to kind of grasp this idea, especially if you grew up in the 60s and you said, well, what's the big deal? Everybody smoked pot. Well, some of the things that I've seen have really been the result of not only the.
So maybe.
I'm sorry.
That was very good, actually.
Get me started. And
I actually forgot something to my mind. I just wanted to make sure I got it in. If you have questions, you can line up at the podium, or if you don't want to ask questions, you can write them down on the card. So we can move on to Rita. And we'll go back. If you have questions, please feel free to ask questions. But if you can just introduce yourself in 1 or 2 minutes. Why? For you. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Rita Crabtree-Kumpa. I'm a resident of Manhattan Beach. I've lived in Hermosa and the South Bay, Manhattan Beach area for the last 33 years. I did do a stint, I grew up in New York, in the suburbs of New York City. Spent a lot of time when I was a child in New York City, and there was a lot of homeless issues. And I always wondered, where do these people come from and what do they do? We spent a lot of time with my daughter in New York City and in other places, Africa, India, and she always said, Mom, we have to help them. And I said, I don't know how. I'm a speech-language pathologist by training. I spent years doing advocacy work. And in the last few years, I've been looking for some sort of passion that could lead me back into the work world. And after I lost a sibling of mine who struggled with mental illness her entire life, and the family, she would have been homeless if we didn't constantly support her, put her up in housing and pay her rent and help her with her budget. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is full circle. This is where I'm interested. I got involved in a group called Saturday Blessings, which is part of American Martyrs Church. We go down to downtown LA on Saturday mornings, and we outreach. We interface with people. We talk to them. We have sandwiches, and sometimes we have some clothes. But really, it's to meet and greet and humanize and hopefully bring people to resources so that they can, we try to help them help themselves. A year and a half, 2 years ago, I became aware of Lucia and Lee and Debbie and many other people on Nextdoor, and we started talking about the homeless in our own area. And as I walked around and walked my dog, I noticed, wow, we do have, there are individuals here. So I just started doing what I do in downtown LA. I just started talking to people, humanizing them, giving them some dignity, and realized, wow, everybody needs help. Whether there's one person, 22 or 45, they need help. We can't say that there's not a problem. If one person doesn't have a home, it's a problem. So experience and more knowledge working with individuals and helping them to get off the streets.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Burton. As many of you know, I served on the city council for 4 years. You really get to know a community when you're serving on city council. And I used to say there's a lot of great things about Manhattan Beach that make this a great community. We talk about the schools, the weather, but it's you, the residents. So I want to applaud Lucia and the other board members for forming this organization. This is exactly what we do in Manhattan Beach. I do have some experience with homeless. I grew up in Venice. There was some homelessness in Venice when I was growing up. I'm also a former senior assistant city attorney for LA, so I was a prosecutor who prosecuted quality of life crimes. I then was general counsel for several years with LAPD, and of course they had to address the homeless issues downtown. So I was really drawn to this organization, and Be Safe, because I think they've got the right model, and it is a helping hand, not a handout. And so I really believe in what they're doing.
So, are there any questions from the podium? Well, if there are, you can line up. And I have one here on the card, and I'll just read it. Recently, the LA County passed Measure H, which has generated millions in sales tax money to help the homeless. If you were given this money, how would you use it to help homelessness? And maybe we can start with Dr. Martinez and just go down and rotate through again.
Okay, thank you. So what I think can be helpful is, and something to remember is that everybody is dealing with different issues that is homeless. There's people where it's primarily financial. There's a lot of domestic violence issues that have led people to homelessness. There are issues related to sexual identity that lead people to homelessness. So there's lots of different things that need to be worked on. But essentially what I would encourage our our cities to do is to think about a combination of treatment, intensive, assertive case management, going out to where people are, providing them the assistance with getting housing, getting other social resources. A lot of times that people who are homeless don't know exactly what's available to them, and sometimes getting some of the things they need it's really difficult to navigate the system, so they really need the help. So I don't want to get confident.
Thank you.
I think, when I think of what $440 million a year being raised by the 0.25% tax, one of the most urgent areas that I see is outreach. I have the opportunity to be exposed to 100, 150 people on a Saturday morning. I have the opportunity to speak to 10, 15, 20 of them. I hear over and over again how they feel that their case has gotten dropped by an agency, or that they don't know how to get their social security card, or they need a birth certificate and they're not sure how to go about that. We need more boots on the ground to help people help themselves. I'd like to see more peer advocates that can help at a lower level. Of the case managers can get the big work done, and the peer advocates can help people get towards those resources. That would be my primary area where I'd like to see the funds going.
Well, I think Manhattan Beach City Council has done a good job. The Honorable Suzanne Haddon is here tonight, and they have applied for a grant and received a grant of $330,000 with the Beach City. So they're going to do a lot of outreach and things like that. But I like to focus on the police department. And it really comes down to, we're very lucky to have the police department that we have. I've been general counsel in several police departments. I know police departments. So first of all, they come, like those officers you saw in that film, that's not Manhattan Beach Police Department. They would never act that way. They're one of the best community policing police departments I've ever seen. And I know what I'm talking about. What they need is the training, and that's what the city's been doing, the city's been providing. These officers are scared if they don't have the training, and they're getting the training now. I think we've got half a dozen officers trained on mental health issues. They are now not doing the job alone. 30 years ago, it was considered to be a law enforcement problem. And arrest and enforcement were the That's not where our police department is now. They are working with all the providers, service providers, and they can be of great assistance. And when they get that training, they know how to interface with that homeless person and get them the help in the hand they need. So that's where I think the money should go too, and also the right training for our police officers so they know how they can help the homeless.
I agree with him. I think the police officers are very important. I was lucky that police officers treated me fairly, over the years that I was out there. As far as the money goes, I know it's expensive to get off the streets. I'm from Seattle, and it would take $475 to get off the streets into transitional living, where you could live for 18 months. And the last time I got off the streets, it cost $1,000, first, last, and deposit on a $400 room. And I could see that, as helping the people. I don't know how many homeless people there are here, but, getting them off the street and into a place is expensive.
It's interesting, none of your answers touched on housing, but they were all focused on services. I found that very interesting, that nobody mentioned shelters or, there are a lot of ideas out there, setting up cat vans, but it seems like everyone is in favor of more services and outreach. I saw somebody at the podium. Do you want to ask your question?
Hi, my name's Eve. I'm a volunteer with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, so this is very pertinent. I'm also a school teacher who went back to school to get a certificate in counseling to work with people with substance use disorders, because I was getting so tired of hearing students and working with students who weren't flourishing in the classroom because of either mental health issues or either their own or somebody else's substance use. So my question is, first of all, is there a plan to get this into the schools? I did hear that it was really supposed to be a form of prevention, and I loved the movie. So that was my first question. And the other question is, this is really more a legal matter. I've talked to any number of people who were pushed onto the streets from their vehicles because their vehicles were impounded and they didn't have the money to get it back. So I was wondering if there's organizations that can help people to get their cars out before they get too expensive, or if you can ask people to not impound people's cars if that's their domicile. Thank you.
So maybe that question, so there sounds like there were two questions. Maybe Mark can answer the question about impounded cars, and does Rita want to take the question on education?
Yes, as far as I can understand, I may have to have Heidi answer some of this. To understand the question, you were asking if this particular movie is getting into the schools? Is that what yeah. So I know they showed it about a year ago, but perhaps we should have Heidi answer that question because she would better understand, she's more knowledgeable about what she's doing with this program in general. Sorry, Heidi.
Thank you so much. The goal of the project is to get it into schools, and it is very hard. And so we wanted to do a screening at Miracosta High School because we had 5 Miracosta students involved, and yeah, and they unfortunately said no. They told me no last week. Yeah. So, and I said, well, look, you've got these students that worked this summer for free. Isn't this a great message? And they said, well, Beach City's Health District already has a calendar for the year, so it's all set. So, I'm reaching out to other school districts. I'm not deterred. I am very determined to get this message out because it's really important. And as Dr. Martinez was saying, there's a lot of use and people think it's safe, but there's a percentage of the population that's more at risk than others, and we really must make this risk known to everyone. So I'm working hard, and if anybody has any ideas or any connections, connections that can help me, please let me know.
I have a connection. Mike Matthews and I are Rotarians, so I can talk to him, so we'll talk afterwards.
Thank you.
Right.
I think Mark has a question about inbound cars.
I'm-
But while Mark answers that question, I guess part of NP Safe is how do you balance public safety and homelessness in the area of impound cars? I don't know the circumstances of why the car was impounded, but if it was on private property or if it was parked over 72 hours, and maybe there were violations, how do you balance that? Keeping a car versus following the rules?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure you know that each police department has its own culture. They're so distinctly different, you wouldn't believe it. There are heavy-handed police departments that would go to an impounded car and not think about the consequences. We don't have one of those police departments. I'm not aware of that being a practice in Manhattan Beach. I'm aware of other cities and other departments doing that. I think you're in a difficult position because the officer is legally authorized to impound a car. But again, it comes down to training, it comes down to resources to understand the consequences. Are they making it better by impounding the car? Probably not for that person, probably not for the community. But again, that's not going on in Manhattan Beach that I'm aware of. That's not the type of culture we have.
So how would you, if you were a police officer, somebody was complaining maybe about a car that was broken down, because we see those along like Uganda, broken down car not operable, how would you approach that situation if somebody was living in it?
Can I answer that? I think that one of the best tools that every person in this room can use is twofold. One, you can dial 211 and speak to a person and explain the situation, that you have an individual and their car looks like, it's in disrepair and they're living in their car. How can they get to resources? Maybe the resources include how do they get to a case manager who can help them address the tickets that they may have on the car or the registration that they need to get. They may be able to help them with funding. They can certainly help them with housing. So that's one way if you are willing or able to directly interface with the individual. The second way that each of us can get involved is to go on la-hop.org and you make a report that this person is living in their car, it's evident by these particular circumstances, this is where they are, you give their location, a description of the car, and ask directly. It says, what do they need? And you can say, it looks like they need, services for their car and services for housing. And they will send, that goes to LAHSA and the Department of Mental Health, and they will send a team out to approach the individual themselves, to arrest them, not to cite them, but to talk to them about what their needs are. Do they need housing? Do they need jobs? Where are they? Is this where they're permanently living? And how can we get them off the streets and doing other things? So those two tools, dialing 211 if you're directly interfacing with the individual, or going on lahop.org will help an individual who is on the streets, whether they're in their cars and they need registration, etc., or if they're living directly on the street.
Hi, I'm a psychologist. My name is Virginia Green, and I've been having a question about previously incarcerated people who end up being homeless because they can't get leases and they can't get housing because they're felons, and so they end up on the streets. And I had a question. My daughter works at Tarzana Treatment Center. She's a psychologist as well. And we were talking yesterday about whether the Department of Mental Health and this $450 million that we have, which I'm so grateful for, if they communicate with the jail system, with the corrections people, to coordinate both treatment I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway, all that money from Department of Mental Health and all that money in the prison system, are they talking to each other to create programs both in prison and then on release? That's one. And also, there's two people here today who are on the Beach Cities Health District Community, Community Health Committee. So we meet quarterly to talk, and our big push now is mental health for teens. That's 100% what we're doing. And we've created a lot of programs in the last year that are hopefully really helpful. And if you're not coordinating with Beach Cities, you should be, because we're making a lot of effort on mental health.
So I could answer that question in regard to what happens with the Department of Mental Health. We have a couple of different programs. We have both a women's and a men's reintegration program, where social workers go into the jail, identify people who really have more of a mental illness than a legal issue, and work with the judges to divert them into treatment. Oftentimes it's going into substance abuse treatment and then into outpatient programs. We also have this work being done through the Office of Diversion and Reentry. A few days ago, there was actually an announcement that Governor Newsom passed a large bill to fund the Office of Diversion and Reentry, to expand some of the pilot projects that they've done, showing this benefit to less recidivism when people are getting mental health treatment. So there are different points in the legal process that people can get diverted to mental health. Sometimes it's while they're in jail before they get sentenced. Other times it's afterwards. So there are a few different mechanisms and programs in play. But as was mentioned earlier about this communication coordination with law enforcement, that is a really important thing when it comes to working with the homeless. I've worked with programs where we work with police, fire, community business owners. The more that everybody can work together and communicate, the better.
Hello. Hi, my name is Bettina. So when I listen to you, it really sounds like there is help. But I see the homeless, but then I read the newspaper. When I'm reading it, but nobody wants homeless shelters. Everybody wants them off the street. But I haven't read anything where it's really a solution. But when I listen to you now, it sounds like the police department is great and there's shelters and help. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit? Where are the shelters? Like I read, okay, I think it was Manhattan Beach, they're now trying to put the homeless into Bell, a different town or city. And then I thought, well, a lot of homeless probably don't want to go completely out of where they are right now. So can you maybe have some information more on that? Where are shelters? Does that really help? Thank you.
There are a variety of shelters. There is the Salvation Army shelter in Bell, which is a 500-bed facility, and it is in our SPA, Service Planning Area. We're in Service Planning Area 8. And that encompasses, Linwood and Hawthorne.
It's like a health district.
Yeah, it's a large district from San Pedro and around. So that is one shelter. There are a couple of other private shelters around. I know there's one in Linwood, there's one in Carson. There are also other housing options. Collaborative housing, for example, which is SHARE, which is up in Culver City. They have a collaborative housing office. And what they do is they intake calls, people who say, I need housing. And then they make calls to find houses, rooms in houses, where people are, for example, if you have like a duplex, a family might live in one side and be open to collaborative housing on the other side, where let's say it's a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom house, there'll be 2 persons to each bedroom, and then they live in that space, and there's a peer advisor that facilitates their paying their rent. They pay about 1/3 of whatever they can afford, and then they may be able to get 2/3 of the rent through other fundings. So those are options, and those are really good options for condensed areas like Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, Torrance. Torrance has a shelter, but I'm not familiar with exactly where in Torrance it is. Basically what the police do and what Harbor Interfaith, who is our service planning area provider, they have lists of all of the shelters and availabilities, so they start calling. When, let's say, the police speak to a person on the Strand and say, can we get you into shelter? They'll call Harbor Interfaith or PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, and find out from them where there are available beds. So that's where there's an available bed is what you can offer. You need to get on the microphone if you're going to answer that.
Redondo, Hermosa, and Manhattan have a regional homeless plan. So they cooperate together, and they receive funds together, and they contract together, Harbor Interfaith. One of the jobs that Harbor Interfaith is finding also permanent housing solution. So there is what she said, which is temporary, transitional, and then there is a commitment. We have $330,000 to pay them, because their job is to find permanent housing
And that's,
and for the homeless in this area, in our regional area.
it's slow. It's admittedly slow. The process is slow, and there's, there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people trying to get, into these resources. There's people who get given, Section 8 housing vouchers, and they can't find housing. There's landlords who won't accept them. So Harbor Interfaith, the case managers that they work with, our police department, they're all trying to work together to push through and to interact. Share with the Collaborative Housing Office, trying to work together to get people off the streets and into housing, first temporary and then hopefully permanent. But it's a really slow process, even to get the person to the point where they will accept housing and shelter.
So Kirk, I have a question for you. You were homeless for a decade in Seattle. At what point were you open to housing? I mean, I know you can tell that you were living under freeway. Did you have an offer of housing, and did you accept it? At what point were you open to housing as a homeless?
I never received.
Okay, you want to use this one? Okay.
Living under a bridge, I was never approached by a case manager or anybody. I was just left basically alone. And, I didn't seek out housing. I didn't want to live in a shelter, or anything like that. And it wasn't until I asked the family for help and I got on Social Security, and the process is slow. I applied for Social Security and was not approved for like 6 months. And so I was under the bridge for 6 months, but then they paid me my back pay. And so I ended up with like $5,000 from Social Security and was able to afford the $1,000 for first, last, and deposit to get off the street. But it is a slow process.
So what kept you on the street for 10 years? Were you were homeless? Were you looking for housing for that 10 years, or what
No, I was John the Baptist. I thought that was my lot in life, and I had delusions. You know, my retirement plan was UFOs. You know, I thought the UFOs would come and get a person like me, and I really believed it. You know, it was the drugs and the mental illness, and I just had a lot of delusions, and they fit with my lifestyle, so I just accepted it. You know, it was just the way things had turned out. You know, my parents taught me that life is hard and life is unfair, and I found that to be the case. And, you know, it wasn't until, you know, I asked for help and got on Social Security that changed everything. I haven't been homeless since I've gotten on Social Security, and I think we have a wonderful safety net in Social Security.
So, Dr. Martinez, a question for you. For those homeless that might not be ready for housing, how do you, can you treat people on the street for their mental illness and addiction and get them ready for housing? Or is it impossible to treat somebody on the street?
So that's a great question, and this is really an area where we're trying to put more focus, is actually providing treatment on the street, both therapy, medication, as well as the case management and the other services. Over the past 8 years or so, I've worked with two organizations. One is the People Concerned, the other one is St. Joseph Center. They both provide these types of services in Santa Monica and also in Venice. And so I was able to see patients on the street. And you know, what I think is, what I like to encourage doctors to understand is that you may have to spend some time getting to know a person. You know, if you meet John the Baptist under a bridge, he may not say, hey, yeah, you know, let's go take some medication. You got to develop a little bit of a relationship. And so, you know, I think as physicians, we need to be more patient. We need to go out there and, you know, develop rapport. And it's slow and it's challenging, but you know, people do get better. And I think that's really the message.
So, and continuing, I hope I didn't cut you off again. I mean, 2 strikes for me. So, following that line of questioning, Mark Burton, this is a little bit about mental health court and crimes that might be committed by homeless. Traditionally, you know, if a homeless person commits a crime, they're in jail. They serve their sentence, they're released. So now there's mental health courts and there's other thoughts on how to manage homeless with mental illness. Do you have any thoughts on that?
As I stated earlier, there's a number of our officers who have been trained now how to interface with someone who has a mental illness. We also are partnering twice a week. One of our officers partners with a mental health professional and goes out and talks to homeless people that may have mental issues and then connects them up with a caseworker. So that's the best way, is to get it at the front end, get professionals out there in the field with the police officers, get the police officers trained up. I think we've got a half dozen trained now. We'll get more trained. Because imagine you being out there, being a police officer, and encountering somebody who has a mental illness. Would any of us know what to do? No, we wouldn't. And that's why it's training, training, training. And right now, our department is getting trained up, and we also team up with mental health professionals. And once you're in the system, it's very difficult. In the movie there, remember the police officer says, hey, listen, if you keep acting this way, you're going to be held over. That's known as a 5150. The state has the right to hold you for 72 hours for a mental health evaluation. So once you get in that system, it becomes more and more difficult. So they're changing with the courts now. They're recognizing that that's not the way to handle this issue. So, but it really is at the front end. If you can get somebody out there in the field to diagnose as soon as possible, get a caseworker partnered up with them, with a professional, and also so the police officers can recognize mental illness when they see it.
We have a question at the podium.
Hello, my name is Morgan Weber, and I go to Cal State Long Beach. I'm a senior, going to my senior year. I like to educate people on people first language. It's so people experiencing homelessness instead of people who are homeless or homeless people, that helps to humanize them. I have a multifaceted relationship with homelessness. My mom is homeless. She has been homeless for 15 years. So that began my curiosity of how I can help people experiencing homelessness. going into Cal State Long Beach, I was realizing that I had multiple friends not being able to continue their education because of the inaffordability of housing and because of the cost of college. Unfortunately, most of my friends have a house over a roof over their heads, but I did a sleep out on my campus to raise awareness for students experiencing homelessness, housing insecurities, and food insecurities, which is a huge population that we don't always talk about. I do love that you guys are bringing a view on mental health and that aspect of people experiencing homelessness, but what I really think we need is housing, affordable housing. I lived in Hawthorne, and within 2 months, 60 days, I went from paying rent of $9.75 to $14.95, and it was because SpaceX put in a parking lot and we got a Starbucks on the corner.
Wow.
My question to you is, does Manhattan Beach have any land that is city land that they're actually considering putting affordable housing that isn't just Section 8? This is for students, this is for people aging out of foster care, this is for our young people that are the ones sleeping in cars because that's the only place and that's the only way they can survive. We have students that have 2 or 3 jobs and going to school full time and still unable to afford housing. So is MB safe, I believe? Are you guys looking at multifaceted solutions, not just for mental health?
So, I don't know, Rita and Mark can address that, since they're from Manhattan Beach.
The answer is yes. That's a simple answer. The answer is we need to look at every option we possibly can. Collaborative housing is what we've come around to in the immediate, that's already in existence, in that there's an office at Share who looks at is finding collaborative housing immediately. There's been a lot of discussions about, are there any properties, maybe buildings that could be used that maybe are for sale. Right now, there's nothing that we've been able to come up with, but there are definitely ideas being thrown around with where can we consider having affordable places for people to live. One option is, and it's something that hasn't been allowable in Manhattan Beach, is kind of grandma flats where you can have an extra accessible unit, maybe above your garage or something like that. And these types of things have to come to the city council and be discussed among the community, and all those are potential options, yes. But again, unfortunately, nothing moves quickly. But all of those discussions are happening. I welcome your participation and feedback and communication with us so that we can continue to look at all facets and consider all options for individuals.
Well, this is a county, the Medjugorje County, and so the county has subgroups throughout the state. So in our county, you'll have various subgroups. They're known as Council of Governments. So there is a South Bay Council of Governments. I think it's been 16 cities or something like that, South Bay cities. And so they look at things regionally and regional solutions. So obviously Manhattan Beach, there isn't much land. We're kind of built out. So regionally, they're looking for areas where you could have something like that type of housing. Anytime I hear affordable housing in Manhattan Beach, I want to laugh. I'm sorry, there's hardly any land here. So we were looking regionally, is there some place in the South Bay Council of Governments where we can identify that type of housing in the future?
So Kurt, would you mind telling the audience when you first moved back into housing, what kind of housing did you move into, and how was it, and where are you now in terms of housing?
I first moved into a rooming house that was basically just about 20 rooms in a building with a couple of kitchens, a couple of bathrooms, and I had a room that was in the basement, and it cost $400 a month. And that's where I first started.
And that work for you? How's that compared to where you
Well,
are now?
the problem for me was that I didn't like myself very well, and I ended up in a room by myself, and it was a lot of despair because I had wasted a college education, I had squandered my life, and here I was 50 years old and had nothing to show for my life, and I was alone in a room by myself. So, I became suicidal. I thought about getting enough heroin to have an overdose, and that lasted about a week, but something kept me alive, and I just bore on. But, being outside, you don't have four walls closing in on you, so it was rather hard to deal with four walls. I've heard Rita talk earlier, and Dr. Martinez talked about people that have a hard time adjusting to living in a place after they've been outside, where they sleep on the floor or they sleep on the doorstep because they're unused to being in a bed, things like that. And, I found right now I'm sharing a house with another person in the AA program that has 10 years sobriety, and it's the best housing I've had in a long time. And I will say a lot for the AA program. People help out other people. You've got people that have got 30 years clean and sober, that have lives, that have jobs, wives, children, grandchildren, and they love to help out the newcomers. So it's always around as a resource. I didn't go there to find a resource, but I found a resource in doing the 12-step program.
I think I wanted to just highlight something you said I think is really important, which is that people need community. And if you have, many people who are living outside will have a community of people that help each other, and they, sometimes I feel like it's almost healthier than what people living inside have. But and a lot of times we want to do the right things and we get them into housing, but then they get isolated, and they go from, say, living on the beach to, having an apartment in South LA where they don't know anyone, because that's where their Section 8 voucher was. So I think that as a system, we do need to think about how we maintain that community when somebody does go into a housing situation, whether it's a permanent supportive housing or other housing.
And that's why it's really vitally important to have wraparound services and access to self-help groups, AA, ACA, CODA, Code of Ethics Anonymous, any one of those, whatever you can relate to, NA, it's a community. I heard Kurt say before, he was just talking yesterday to somebody, spent 20 minutes talking to somebody who's only had 30 days. Maybe they were a little bit shy, maybe they were a little insecure, but he's had 10 or 11 years now, and he could talk to this person, and this person feels he has an example of somebody who went through the same thing that he went through. It's suddenly a community, like, wow, I've got somebody to look up to, I've got support, I got people who love me even before I can love myself. And those peer self-help groups are an amazing instant community for individuals, much more healthy than an encampment full of individuals who are struggling within themselves how to get through the day.
Yeah, and I just got to add, probably one of the beauties of my life is being in a group and seeing the light come back on somebody's eyes, when they get 30, 60, 90 days clean and sober, and to see them come back to life and, get a place to live, get a job, have reestablishment with their family. I mean, that's a joy in my life.
And we have a question at the podium.
This one is about the film. I know you actually never got physical, Well, but how did you make, when in John the Apostle slapped a young teenager, how did you make the sound effect? Also, I didn't get why there was blood on the floor at one scene.
The slapping sound effects from a sound effect library I found online.
Let's do this right.
Okay. And the blood in that scene is as a result from the main character Danny cracking Captain Teth's floor. Therefore, blood pools out, and that's why it's there.
Hi, I'm Charlie Scola, and I think you know me. So, you know, every Wednesday at St. James Church in Redondo Beach, I feed the homeless. And I've been doing that for quite a number of years. And I'm with a group of women in there, and it's really terrific. And every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we do that. And Wednesdays, I'm in there for quite a number of hours doing that work. And I would see a lot of those people there, if they were offered a home and a place, they would take it. But as I ride around Los Angeles, and I do business downtown occasionally, I see people on the street corner who are absolutely, really having a mental disease. Now, these are people who you can absolutely probably not help unless, of course, you were able to incarcerate them into a mental facility. However, right now, the biggest problem with that is, and how are you addressing this, the ACLU is telling you you cannot touch them. And meanwhile, they're still on the street, they're babbling, they're causing no trouble, but this is the big problem, because if they're not causing trouble, you can't touch them. What about a law that would change that and say, if you see someone who is obviously having some type of a mental breakdown, that you actually can take them, bring them into a facility, and force them into some type of a help. And maybe that changes it, because there's a good percentage of the people that as I ride around, I see that. Sometimes I just roll my windows up and lock the door, and I'm sure I'm not the only one.
So Kurt, definitely we're going to have Dr. Martinez, but how would you have felt if somebody during your 10 years of being on the street picked you up and said, you need help today, we're going to get you help, whether you like it or not?
I would feel violated.
Could you have made decisions for yourself during that time?
You know, I was in my disease. You know, I was, you know, when you're under a bridge doing a lot of drugs, you really don't care. You're looking for the UFOs, and you feel like John the Baptist. And so, you know, being under a bridge is no big deal. And, you know, if I was offered help, it would mean taking away my drugs from me. And that was paramount. You know, my message is, you know, you can't save somebody that doesn't want to be saved. You know, I lived out in India for a number of years, and there's a place called the ABC Recovery Center. And, you know, you meet people. I went to a lot of meetings out there. You meet people, and they'll spend their day recycling. They'll go around to apartment buildings, and they'll pick up recycling, you know, and they'll get like $40 worth, and then they'll get $40 of booze or drugs, and then they'll just walk around all night and end up sleeping underneath a bush in the morning. And they'll wake up and do it again. And they go on, and they don't want help. They're just doing it, you know. But you have like the ABC Center for when they get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And one of the attributes of the ABC Center that I think is, you know, is like a model is they provide transitional living. You know, they'll give them 90 days treatment and then provide them transitional living so they can get a job and get a place to live. And, you know, I don't know if transitional living is part of the model that you guys work with.
Absolutely, and part of the problem that we had over the years was that transitional living or sober living was not something that would be covered by Medi-Cal or by insurance. So it was always challenging to figure out how to pay for it. But recently things have changed where we are starting to, California submitted a special waiver that allows us to start to pay for transitional living and sober living for people. So we're starting to recognize that more and more, that we need, not just to treat somebody in the hospital or in a rehab setting, but to help them with the transition. And with the Measure H funding and with the MHSA funding that some people were referencing, this big funding that, where is that going to help people experiencing homelessness or people who have mental illness? It's something that I think will take time. And so I would say, try to be patient with us, because as time goes on, there are different agencies, smaller agencies that are all trying to find different solutions to the problem, but it is going to take time.
What do you think about the survivorship? Charlie, I think, gave the example of somebody who's just barely on the street, mentally ill, delusional, gravely disabled.
Right. So there's a situation, so anybody who is acutely dangerous to themselves, danger to others, or they can't take care of their basic needs, they can't find food or basic shelter to keep themselves warm and alive, those individuals can be placed on 5150, as was mentioned before. So that's something that that can be done now. It's not a long-term solution. For some people, even after they've been in the hospital for a long time, they need additional treatment, but they just can't see that they need it. There is an option called a conservatorship, where somebody is, for 1 year at a time, the court determines whether or not they can make their own decisions about health care, and they assign a person, a conservator, to make those decisions for them. Usually it's a family member who can decide, are they going to be taking medication, are they going to the hospital? Historically, and really the way it is now, a person can't really get onto a conservatorship unless they're in a hospital. And from there, they apply to the court. Now the problem is it's a long process, it's very expensive for the hospital. So something that we're piloting at the Department of Mental Health is starting to look at conservatorships for people who are outpatients, who are on the street and really can't take care of themselves, but don't necessarily need to be in a hospital right away, but need some extra help and really can't make good decisions for themselves. So we're trying to work toward that. I do think that it's sometimes difficult for us to explain this to our our politicians and people who make laws about why it is that we need to take away people's rights sometimes. But I have had patients where the day before I had them on a hold. They hated me. They didn't want me to keep them in the hospital. Then after a day or two, they say, you know what, doc, you were right. I'm glad I'm here. And so I have seen people make that shift.
We have a question at the podium.
Hi, thank you for having us, you guys. I really think it's commendable the work that you're doing, and it's very brave of you to come out and tell your story, so thank you for doing that. A couple things. I'm actually a neighbor. I live in Playa del Rey down the street, but love spending time in your community, so I visit often. I also have had family members who've been involved in the system for things with mental illness and substance use disorder, and I'm very passionate about the cause. So I've actually found myself recently working for an organization that allows me to partner with community organizations and also I was in the LA County Jail last week at 5 a.m. doing trainings there. I'll be there tomorrow actually doing some trainings, and I've been CDCR Lancaster last week doing trainings. So
So, I'll let the panel go through, but, Manhattan Beach has been proactive, and we have a homeless liaison, and we did have a homeless task force made up of residents and business owners, and we have a good relationship with the city and homeless liaison. And they're in the process, service providers, homeless liaison, of getting the data. Up to now, we really haven't had data, so we really couldn't look at how well we were doing and what needed attention. And hopefully, with the contract we have in place, that'll be forthcoming. So we'll get a better indicator of what's going on. But I think one is we can just look around and see how we're doing. I think a lot of it is just visual. And I see new homeless every day, so I know that there's a lot more work to do. I see some homeless that have been here for a long time. And then we have homeless who die on the street, which I think is a tragedy. So we have work to do. We're not there yet, but I think we can go in the right direction. But I'm gonna maybe start off with Mark Burton, and I'm sorry, your question was, how do we know where you're going?
A lot of the programs that I work with, and it's a struggle, right? So figure out how are we going to know that we're successful or that we're success. Yeah. So what are the outcome measures that you're looking at to show success?
I guess Mark, how do you think Manhattan Beach is doing? How do you think this area is doing?
I'll just refer to Manhattan Beach. I think we have been proactive. The council's been very proactive. We have a 5-year plan. We have a homeless liaison. We now have a contract. And our police department is training. And then we're also liaisoning with NBC and other organizations. But in Manhattan Beach, it really is educating all the residents and letting them know, hey, if you see a homeless person, call the city homeless liaison. If you see even a police officer can help a homeless person and put them in touch with all the right resources they need to have. Let me just share a quick anecdotal story. There's a couple out here in the audience I spoke to beforehand. Their neighbors are Rita, and Rita kind of trained them up on, hey, look, we have all these resources. They were taking a walk on the beach, south of the pier. They saw a young family with a 2-year-old. They were homeless. So they approached them and said, hey, listen, I know you're homeless. There are resources. We have a homeless liaison in the city. And they're able to get them services and help. That's how we do it. Each one of us needs to get involved. That's just a wonderful story. That makes a difference.
I also wanted to share something about, so I work with an organization called the People Concern. And we had a project with the city of Santa Monica where they identified the top 30 highest utilizers of emergency room services, police services, all of whom were homeless and most had mental and substance issues. And they also partnered with the RAND Corporation to look at outcomes. And one of the outcomes that they were looking at was, what are the costs? We know that these issues are causing a lot of costs in the healthcare system and police. And what they found was by taking a team that cost a fair amount of money, it's about $300,000 a year for these 30 patients. But they found that by spending that money, they actually saved money over the course of all the other incidental expenses that would have happened because they had less frequent hospitalizations, less arrests. So I would encourage any project to think about lots of different types of measures and not just like how many people have been housed, because that's unfortunately something that a lot of homeless organizations come up against when they're talking to funders, is they want to know, well, how many people got housed? That's all that they sometimes want to look at. But it's important to look at other things like how many people have been educated, how have we seen a decrease in hospitalizations or incarceration.
And we have, as MB Safe is working with the City Council, with our liaison, George Gabriel, we post the question and are addressing it as far as how many police calls have there been to address needs for homeless? How many times have the paramedics, the fire department have to gone out? And can we gather all this information? So these are discussion topics happening. We're a little bit young, and so we don't have any numbers yet, but we certainly do have a lot of success stories
I have about 4 questions here, and they deal with. It's actually- Oh. So let me, so I think it is about marijuana and the legalization of marijuana. So marijuana is legal. Kids perceive it as safe, but there's evidence to suggest that it's not safe in the developing brain. A lot of chemicals aren't safe in the developing brain. How do you prevent, or how do you educate kids about the dangers of drugs? I mean, this is an age-old question. I mean, I remember the days of the marijuana, oh my God, I can't think of it. And DARE, Reefer Madness and DARE, and it's an age-old question, you know, kids want to experiment, they're going through puberty, they're peer pressure. So how do we educate our kids about the risks, and I don't know if you want the risk of drug abuse.
And one thing I would say is that, you know, kids they're kind of wise to scare tactics. So, you know, if you tell them that, you know, well, if you smoke this, you're gonna go crazy. You know, once they try a hit of weed and they realize they didn't, then they're like, okay, the parents are doing crap. So it's really about kind of having an honest conversation about what their friends are doing, what's out there, but helping them also to realize that, you know, when some people smoke and they start getting a little bit of paranoia, that's psychosis. And what we're seeing as the intensity and the concentration of these cannabis products is increases, we're seeing more people coming into the hospital for treatment because they're psychotic. We're seeing more severe addiction and withdrawal syndromes that we didn't really associate with marijuana. There's a common saying that, you know, marijuana is psychologically addictive, but it's not physically addictive. That's really not true. We've had people hospitalized because of the withdrawal symptoms of cannabis products. So it's about having, you know, I really think, an honest discussion about, you know, there are things that are more risky than others. But at the same time, there are risks, and you may even, you know, notice that you hear friends being paranoid, and that's, you know, a little bit of psychosis. And there's some recent data out that shows in certain cities that depending on how much cannabis is around and the intensity, the psychosis is up to 9 times more likely to happen in those areas. So one of the heavy cities is Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, people there are about 9 times as likely to experience psychosis. So we're starting to see this more and more. It is stronger, but it's also not the same as smoking crack. You know, we want to have a kind of an honest dialogue with our kids. That's my opinion.
So what would you tell your kids about smoking marijuana, Dr. Martinez? If you ever had a child, I don't know if you do or not, and he wanted
My
to...
daughter's 3, and I told her just one hit and that's it.
I think that's fair. So you would tell your daughter not to smoke marijuana, or?
I would tell her that, you know, we really don't know what happens when you're young and when your brain is developing. Your brain doesn't finish developing until you're about 25. We don't know what the effect is. So, you know, you may not want to take a chance. We know that the cannabinoid system is a natural system in our bodies. We have cannabinoid receptors. They don't exist there just for us to feel the effects of pot. Cannabinoid receptors are involved in our perception of time, in our pruning of neurons, and how we develop memories. So we know that people have memory issues, concentration problems when they're smoking weed regularly. We just don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, especially if somebody is smoking 90% concentrates, you know, versus an old plant product. So I would, you know, educate my kids once they get, you know, old enough that it's probably not worth taking the risk if you value your brain, but you have to make your own decisions about that.
Had a question?
Hi, thanks. My takeaway tonight is it's to solve the homeless problem. it's grassroots oriented. And I'd like to ask you a question, sir. You've spoken highly today about AA, and it's nice to hear you speak about the best grassroots organization, you know, in America. What about the AA taking a arm to direct homelessness, and would that, do you think that would help under the umbrella of AA?
No, AA first started out when they founded AA, they thought they were going to solve the world's problems. They were going to open up alcoholic hospitals, and they were going to have houses, and they quickly found themselves in a lot of trouble. And so they have the 12 traditions, you know, and one of them is that we have no opinion on outside issues. So like homelessness is an outside issue to us. You know, we're all concerned about staying sober, you know, today. And, you know, it's more a functional or a practical aspect of it. Something we haven't really talked about tonight is sober housing. You know, is that clean and sober housing that's available to people that, you know, want to stay clean and sober and want to live with people that are clean and sober. You know, like the rooming houses I was in, you know, people were drinking and using drugs all over the place. You know, but you get into a clean and sober house, and there are people that just decide to make clean and sober housing, and they're doing a great deal. You know, there's you know, people who buy a house and say, I'm making it clean and sober housing, and they let people move in, and it really helps out. But AA itself does not have any opinion on outside issues, and homelessness is an outside issue.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Can I just speak to that? And that's why a facility such as Share in Culver City and downtown LA, and there are several others, but it's a facility where you can just go, and they have many programs, and they typically, like Share will have upwards of 40 meetings a week for a variety of different self-help groups. So you could go there, but Share itself, that organization has opened a collaborative housing office, for example. And so in that way, separate from all of the meetings and the, you know, like apolitical, we only address our direct group, an overlying group like that, like Share, can help get involved in such, and they have. So it would be wonderful to see more facilities like Share, because you walk in to this building and there's all these meetings that you can go to, but then there's also an office that's full of computers, and if you're homeless, you can just walk in and say, a person experiencing homelessness, I apologize, I will work on that. A person experiencing homelessness, you walk into this building and someone says, hey, how's it going? You're like, wow, I just gotta, you know, I gotta find some clothes. Like, oh, well, hey, why don't you come over in here and check out one of our computers? Maybe we can help you find a group that's giving out clothes today, or lunch today, or whatever. Or somebody just walks in and says, hey, I need to read a book. Oh, we have a little library over in the corner. Go for it, you know, hang out. I would love to see more of these. It's not a navigation center. It's an area, a place where people can go and find community because there's meetings available there. So someone may walk in and say, well, hey, you know, you want to go to the library? Well, in a half an hour, we're having a CODA meeting. Why don't you join me?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the start of finding a community.
Exactly.
A community is experiencing the same things that you're experiencing. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Sort of following up on Charlie's question and what you also said earlier, Kirk, about if somebody wanted to get you off the street and you weren't ready, you would have felt violated. So, and this is the question to you and to everybody really, what do we do right now with the impending crisis? And there is a crisis. Manhattan Beach isn't so bad, and we have some success of helping people off the streets, and we don't have huge numbers. But there are places in the city, and you read about it all the time, in Los Angeles and Santa Monica and Venice, that people are just like up to here with encampments and people on the street. And what do you do with those people in the meantime until they're ready to get help? How do you balance, you know, I don't feel like going in for treatment today, with the public needs of everyone else in the community?
You know, I hate to say it, but it's like a law enforcement question, because, you know, usually these people are in violation of some kind of law, you know, whether it be trespassing or something. And, you know, they're oftentimes committing crimes, petty crimes, shoplifting, you know, stealing food, things of that, you know, using drugs, you know, at these encampments. And so, you know, you get them off the street.
But you can't lock everybody up, as they said.
Right.
I mean, what, in a perfect world, what would the solution be? Is it to build like a city somewhere and everybody has to go and find out who's on mental health, to local housing services, or what is, I mean, the crisis is floating, and
Right.
Los Angeles is staying in the
I guess for me, it doesn't, I don't feel that the politicians, and I'll just speak broadly, not locally, but broadly, don't have a sense of urgency. I feel this is an urgent, actually I feel it's an emergency. And I have a public health background. If there were 60,000 people who were homeless because of an earthquake, we would bring in FEMA trailers, we would open up the fairgrounds, we would get tents up, we would get everybody name, address, phone number, get on a bus, move them to the fairground, give them a tent, they would set up bathrooms, they would set up counselors, they would get everybody where they need to be. And I don't feel that urgency, I feel the urgency from the public. I think the public is, I think probably had it up to here, but I just wonder why they're, or maybe you don't know, but why don't the politicians have a sense of urgency about this?
Well, my sense is, I'm familiar with politicians in Los Angeles. My sense is there was no leadership 10 years ago, and the problem got away from them. And now it really is an epidemic. And so it makes it that much more difficult to handle. I do think getting the funding with Measure H is helpful, because with government is always about funding. You gotta have money. So I think they're just starting now to take it seriously. I don't know what the answer is, but they are looking for answers now. And I think they're sincere about it. And I think they'll get there, but it took a long time to get to the point we're at now. It's gonna take a long time to actually get it right. And I think we're fortunate in Manhattan Beach that because we're a lot smaller and we're a lot more responsive, we're way ahead of the curve as far as addressing the issues here and helping homeless, giving a helping hand. But Los Angeles got a real problem. And those encampments, by the way, you know, that's disease, pestilence. That is not good for the homeless. It's very, very dangerous. You know, there's a lot of criminal activity going on. And I want to go back to, because when you talk about the homeless, a lot of it has to do with addiction, okay, or mental illness. Well, a lot of it comes down to basically drugs. And when I hear about marijuana, I talk to my friends that are narcotics officers. That is horrible for a young person to take. Horrible. And the fact that it's like, oh, marijuana now everyone's, I just can't believe it. We should hear my wife. Because she was a principal at a grammar school. She has to deal with grammar school kids. She's retired now. But it was like, it's okay, it's so pervasive. It's marijuana, it's no big deal. It is a big deal. If you talk to narcotics officers, the THC levels have gone skyrocketing from what they were 25, 30 years ago. It's a very dangerous drug. And we have to start talking that way, rather than acting like it's something kind of okay to do. Anyway, sorry.
So, I know we're getting towards 9 o'clock. Maybe if we can have a quick question and we can wrap up. And then we're going to have Lucia come up and she's going to give our call of action. We need to motivate and engage our community. So, one more question, we're going to wrap up. And the panel can say, wrap up. Lucia.
Hi, I have more of a mental health question. So my name is Carla. My son is 4 years old and he goes to American Martyrs Preschool. So I feel that in order to dig deeper into the why do people step into the world of neuroscience. And my question is, do you offer, is there a way to offer parents of young children a way to learn about how the brain develops at a young, from the time you're in the, in the uterus until, later on in life, as you mentioned, you don't develop that fully, brain doesn't develop until after 24 years old. So, and even then some of us, I even sometimes can deal with certain problems at, at a mature level, just because my nervous system feels like it's in danger. So is there a way maybe to offer those type of services to parents to learn more about the way that works?
I think that's a great suggestion. And part of what I want to do at the Department of Mental Health is on the children and adolescent side, work more on prevention. And it's exactly that. It's education for the parents about what's dangerous. There was a recent news report saying that a large percentage of parents and families on Medi-Cal don't know that lead is dangerous to the developing brain of a child. And many of them are living in these areas that have the highest lead concentration. So we really need to make sure that we're educating families about substances and the developing brain. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here too.
Yeah, thank you. Let's bring it on to our expert panel. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. And Lucia is going to come up and wrap up.
Hi, my name is Lucia La Rosa Ames. I'm the president of MSAFE, and we wanted to make sure that this is not just a discussion that starts and ends tonight. And we hope that we have all learned something, and that next time we see a homeless person experiencing homelessness on the street, we remember, even when he's 30, when he's old, and when he acts crazy, that there was a time in which he was just a kid. They had a mom, and he was loved, or maybe he was never loved, which made the entire thing even more sad. And so I think that the reason why there are so many encampments, the encampments are a sign of our failures to care. Because we started to care when we saw the tent on our driveway. And so we don't have to arrive to that point. We have to address the problem before it arrives to that point. And so next time maybe we see a homeless person that's putting out to them is not there. Don't just make a picture because he acts crazy. And let's remember what we learned today. You can call 211. If you live in Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, or Hermosa Beach, you have to know that our police officers, our firefighters have been trained. They are not, if you call them, if you call for dispatch, you're not going to get anybody in trouble. They know how to recognize the needs. They know how to address those needs and put the person in contact with a mental evaluation specialist or with Arbor Interfaith. So trust our police officers. And then if you have a problem, you can always contact George Gabriel, which is our homeless liaison. If you go out, before going out, you can take one of our resource card. It was produced by the City of Manhattan Beach, and tell you all the different food pantries and the different resources. And you can have one of those cards in your car. If you see a homeless person, maybe ask you for $1, give that resource card. Call 211. You don't ever know how that dollar will be used. And maybe is one day more on the street because it's used for drugs. So if you want to donate money, donate it to a Harbor Interfaith, donate it to a food pantry, or better, volunteer with a food pantry, volunteer with Harbor Interfaith, or volunteer with us. So we have different committees. The most important one that we are really focus on is Homeless Connect. Rita has receiving training, has a long experience with the Saturday Blessing. She will conduct seminars, and she already organized a group of volunteers so that each of us can become the eyes for the Arbor Interfaith, for our police officers, and help them to direct people to professional services. So make it personal. Make it personal, because they are men and women like us. And or we have our educational program, and it costs, because even though we thankful to American Martyrs for its enormous generosity, we still have costs, so you can donate to us. And you know, we can make check, we accept check, we have a PO box, or we even have a Venmo now at MBSafe. And all our donations are tax deductible. So we really hope that at least, you know, we have had 180 people today. I hope at least half of them next time sees a homeless person, remembers this movie, remember it was a kid, and help him to find a way out of the street. Thank you so much for having me.